Hey class, it's Dave DeRocher here in Nashville, Tennessee. Very grateful for everyone. And Dr. Kimball, thank you for the questions you asked. Before I begin, I just would like to say that I was diagnosed with strep throat the other day. So my throat is hoarse. And so if I sound scratchy or I cough, I'm just giving you a little heads up that that's unintentional. But you won't catch strep throat because it's an online class. So that's a good thing. All right, the first question, what are the most common reasons for a board to discipline a counselor? And what was my personal reaction to the list? In Tennessee, the most common things that have happened in the last years, predominantly the last 10 years, that I saw were violations crossing the boundary lines of creating dual relationships. Some were sexual, and others just said they crossed the boundary lines and engaged clients inappropriately. I don't know what that exactly meant, but obviously dual relationships were being formed, and that coincides with a lot of studies that are being done that show that dual relationships are the number one problem and violation of counselors. I did research a little further and found out, though, that 10 years ago, Tennessee and across the United States, the predominant violation was in continual education credits. And that was a study done by C. Emmanuel Ahia and Peter Bacone, who did a study and from 2009 to 2013 and found out the number one violation was actually continual education credits. And they actually notated that Tennessee was the number one leader of violating those continual education credits. So I went back and looked at some of those violations, and sure enough, from 2009 to 2013, the predominant thing that a counselor was violating were these continual education credits. They were fined $200 to $400. And so it must have been some new laws were enacted by the ACA or the Tennessee board required these education credits. So obviously the next question, or what are some themes I see and common reasons for board discipline? Like I said, the dual relationships are a very common theme when people are violating, to be very careful of those areas. I saw other things. People were under the influence. That was one violation. Another was social media, which I'll discuss a little further towards the end here. I did call as well a friend of mine who is a licensed professional counselor and just interviewed him. And I talked to him about, dual relationships. And he mentioned a guy who, after one of his meetings, said, "Hey, let's go grab a beer." And I laughed with him just thinking, yeah, did you go grab a beer with him? And he said, no, I just, obviously I told him that's not how we can do things. And then I asked him about, well, what about with, if you're counseling a young girl in your practice, or, a single woman or a married woman, how does that work? Is it just you alone with her in the room? And he said, yes, that happens all the time. But he said he's never had a problem except once. There was a young girl who said some off the wall things, and he then immediately referred her to a female counselor and terminated his relationship so there wouldn't be any boundary lines crossed there. So I thought that was interesting. In all his years of doing counseling all over the city, he's only had one problem, and he detected it immediately. You said, what was some recent cases that we can bring up that I'd like to discuss? And one that I thought was interesting, is Stacy Putman, which I thought it's interesting. They list the names here of the violations, or those who've had violations. But she lives nearby in Laverne, Tennessee, and she was guilty of disclosing confidential information through social public media. I don't know what she did. Perhaps she put a picture, or she referred to somebody that felt that their confidentiality was broken. But the codes that she broke, primarily in the ACA code, because Tennessee really just follows the ACA code, was H6D, which talk about counselors need to take precautions to avoid disclosing confidential information through public social media. And so there's the whole section of H is designed to have professional presence in social media. And the violations required her to have her license suspended for 180 days. Then she was placed on probation for a year. She had to go through monitoring classes and continual education hours, and she was assessed a $1,000 fine. So that brings me to my question, is in this day and age where things are so filled with social media, how do we do that well? Should counselors even have online accounts? How do you separate the private and the public? And how do we do that well? So that's my question, and thanks for this class. God bless you.